Yeah, sorry, they're not printed on both sides. Oh, great. Okay, it looks like we're on. Thanks again for being here this morning. Welcome. I'm just checking in before we get started to make sure that our virtual participants can hear us okay. Lene, I see you. Yeah, good. We got a thumbs up. Karina, all right. Woohoo. We're off and rolling. I'm Meg McElroy, and I use she, her pronouns. And before we get started into our agenda today, let's do a quick round of introductions. We'll start with our virtual participants who are members of the Community Council, and then we'll move to the folks who are here in person, members of our Community Council, and then we'll do staff. So if you could share your name and your pronouns. After that, we'll go over group agreements and today's agenda. So Lene, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Good morning. Lene Johnson here, and I use she, her, ella pronouns. Nice to see you all.
Karina, can you go next?
I'm so sorry. I chatted it. My computer's stuck on Korean and IT doesn't know how to fix it. So I don't know where the buttons are. So is it okay if I just do chat? Because I know where that is.
Oh, yes, Karina, do you want me to introduce you then? Okay, this is Karina Bjork. She uses she, her pronouns. Thank you for being here this morning. And Dean, would you like to go next?
Yes, Dean Salazar, he, him pronouns.
Alejandra Favela, she, ella pronouns.
Kathy Pedersen, she, her.
Kamala Hurst, she, her.
Hi, Stephen Pham, he, him pronouns.
Good morning, Lolita Bratis, she, her pronouns.
Good morning, Lisa Pellegrino, she, her pronouns.
Good morning, everyone. Erica Bridgman, she, her pronouns.
And in the back with us today, we have Yuxing Zhang, she, her pronouns, and Joel Broussard, he, him pronouns. All right. I just want to remind our virtual participants, and Karina, I know you said you're going to use the chat to alert us if you need anything. And Lene, please go ahead and use the chat or raise hand or wave to us and we can see you. Another thing I wanted to remind everyone before we get started on our group agreements is that at the beginning of the year when we created those, you had asked that we do land acknowledgements at the beginning of each of our meetings. And we had reached out to our colleagues at the Tribal Relations Program at the City of Portland's Office of Government Relations on how the city expects that to be done for city bureaus. At that time, they requested that we refrain from doing one until they had completed guidance that they wanted to provide to all city bureaus. They had expected to have that available to us by the end of this year, but they recently had some staff turnover, so it looks like lines have shifted. So we will bring that forward when we can. These are our group agreements. It would be great to have you all take turns reading them aloud if you're willing to do that. I would ask that you do 2 or 3 at a time because we have 20 of them. So if anyone wants to go ahead and get started and read the first couple, and then folks can popcorn in.
Make space, take space, cell phone on vibrate and put away unless you need to be available for an emergency.
Feel free to take care of your needs. Get up as needed. Make facilitators aware of your access needs so we can support your full participation.
Listen to understand, not to respond. If the facilitator says, I will call on X and then Y, and we need to move on, please allow the facilitator to move on.
Impact over intent, use I statements, use yes and.
Open to diverse communication styles, expect non-closure, show up as authentic self.
Check your privilege at the door. Wisdom is shared. wisdom and shared knowledge. Make decisions based on your values.
Lene, would you like to read the last three?
Sure.
Thank you.
Be respectful of disagreements. Acknowledge that we all have different perspectives. Practice cultural awareness. Microphones at the main table will be turned on during the meeting. Please refrain from side conversations at the table.
Any questions from anyone on the group agreements? All right, terrific. So you all have a copy of the agenda in front of you, and we emailed it out last week, and it was posted on our website for the public. So our objectives today are to continue the discussion on the future PCL grant application and scoring criteria, to work towards further simplifying the application, and to understand the design of the previous PCL grant review process and some design options around that. So we're going to spend some time in small groups this morning, and then some large group discussion, and then a little bit of brainstorming at the end. Any questions? All right, great. Thank you for advancing that slide. So during our last meeting in September, we reviewed with you all the timeline for developing the Levy's next grant-making process and the 3 big steps that you will help us advise. And those are the grant application, the review process, and then a way in which you all will give input to the recommendations for which grants to fund. At our last meeting, you started working on simplifying the application. You worked in small groups to do some brainstorming and answer 2 questions. The first question was, what are the most important qualities of an organization that should receive PCL grants, and why? And the second question was, what important information is needed about the program services that an applicant wants funded so that we can decide whether or not to fund it? In your feedback from the last meeting, you asked to spend more time in small groups, so we designed this agenda around that request and to pick up where we left off last time. We took your brainstorming from the last meeting and we crosswalked it to the Levy's previous grant application. We sent you that document last week. You have a copy in front of you. So the brainstorming that you all did is summarized on page 2 of the document. It's in blue font. The first 6 topics are the organization-related brainstorming. The second 7 topics are the program-related brainstorming. So we took that brainstorming that you did, and then in the subsequent pages of the document, you'll see that blue font, and below it you'll see in black pieces of our previous grant application that most aligned with the ideas that you put forward last time. Today, we will have 2 sessions of small group to continue looking at those organization-related questions and the program-related questions. We will use the work that you do today to draft an application and scoring criteria that can be shared publicly, hopefully in January, so that potential applicants can look at what's being developed. They can provide feedback. Other community members of the public who are interested in this work can also provide feedback. Our intention is to come back to you with that draft and that feedback at our next meeting so you can continue iterating the application and scoring criteria. We also want to kind of keep moving this forward so that by spring we have a draft application template and draft scoring criteria template. That allows us to, once community engagement results are in next spring and you all hear those results and form them into funding priorities, we can plug those funding priorities into that application template because we will already have worked together to create it. Any questions on sort of the goal or where we're headed with the process before I talk about how to get into small groups? Yeah. Can you unmute, Kamala?
One question that came up for me as I was reviewing this information was, I think part of what we heard is that grant seekers were looking for a streamlined application. And so I was curious if you could share what have they identified as where they would like to see a more streamlined process, or have you had that feedback?
They didn't specify particular parts of the application where we could do that. Reviewers sort of suggested that it was a long application last time. on average, it was about 20 pages long, what applicants submitted to us in response to the application. So from a reviewer's perspective, and you'll hear more about this later in the meeting, they had to read 10 applications. So they were reading 200 pages of application information. So for their perspective, a simplified application means it's easier for them to do their review process job. Applicants didn't necessarily give us that direct of simplification feedback. The majority of the feedback they gave around improvements of the process had to do with decision making by our allocation committee, which is not part of what we're working on today. So does that answer your question, Kamala?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. But we think that you all can help with the simplification. Right? We think that your collective wisdom will help us be able to think about those streamline related issues. And because we can then offer the application draft that comes out of this out to the community, we'll be able to hear more around that. Okay. Welcome, Alex. We're glad you're here today. Once you settle in, would you be willing to introduce yourself and share your pronouns? Okay.
Hello, my name is Alex Sanchez. Sorry for being late. I had overlapping meetings. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. And was that it? That's it. Thanks.
Thanks for being here. You're just in time for some small group action. Okay, and I'll give Alex just a quick reminder. We're working on the application. So we're looking at what you all brainstormed last meeting, comparing it to what our actual application in 2019-20 looked like, and you all are going to work on further streamlining it. Okay, so we're going to split you into 3 small groups. One of those groups is going to be hybrid. The other 2 will be in person. And for the first 25 to 30 minutes in your small group, you are going to look at the organization qualities. That's pages 2 through 4 in that crosswalk document. That's those first 6 topics that you brainstormed last time. When you get into your small groups, please identify a note taker, reporter, and a timekeeper. And the questions that you're going to discuss are on the very first page of that crosswalk document. They're the first 2 questions listed at the bottom of the first page. And the first question is, what do you want to keep, eliminate, add, or change about the issues around organization qualities? And then the second question is, of those 6 topics that you all brainstormed around organization qualities last time, how would you rank them in order from most important to least important? So you will have, after your small groups are done, each small group will take about 2 to 3 minutes to report out. And then you all will have some time to kind of share reflections on what you're hearing. Erica's going to facilitate that portion. I'm going to take notes on what you are reporting out and your discussion. Any questions? Yes, Lisa.
What time will it end the small group time?
Around 10:45. That's a great question. And after this small group and the large group discussion that happens out of it, we'll have time for a break. And then we're going to do this all over again, but we're going to look at the program information. Other questions? Go ahead, Stephen.
I assume the black text here is just the crosswalk, and there are other questions and prompts that aren't included here, right?
No. So the questions in black are pretty much exactly what we asked in our previous application. There are a couple places in the crosswalk document where I have italicized print and there's the word note there, and it tells you if there is something that we didn't put in that document that was in our previous application, but that didn't get identified by you all in your last brainstorming. So in other words, there's some of the brainstorming you all did last time generated topics. We plugged in our application that most aligned with those topics, and if there were pieces that didn't align with what you said, we didn't even bring them forward. So you've already streamlined some things.
Oh. So those portions that were essentially eliminated, would you say that they're like, did you all feel good about eliminating them? And
I don't want to answer that because I don't want to bias your process and the conversation here, and I want to make sure we have time for your process. I would just say we noted what they were, so you can decide whether or not they should come back in or not.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And yes, Lisa, did you have a question? Were you raising your hand? Okay. All right, then I will get you into small groups. The hybrid group will be Karina and Lene, and Erica is going to assist you all. And then Kamla, would you be willing to join that hybrid group? You have some experience in a previous meeting with us, being with Erica in front of the screen, so that would be a great way to start. And then Kathy, Dean, Lisa, and Lolita, you are Group B. How about if Group B meets over here on this side? How about Kamla, you and Erica go to this table that's sort of behind me. And then Group C is Stephen, Alejandra, and Alex over here. Did I miss anybody? All right, awesome. We'll see you back here at 10:45. I'll float around the in-person groups. Erica's there to support the hybrid group. Welcome back. Great job. We could tell that you were into some great conversations, so we can't wait to hear the report out. So Erica, do you want to get us started with the hybrid group?
All right, I think, Lene, are you ready to report out on the hybrid group?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we're going to start. I think Meg is going to share her screen, and we're going to start with the things that you want to keep in that, and then we'll move on to eliminate and change, add or change.
Great.
They can say it all together.
Okay, whatever works for you, but I thought it might be easier to do it like. Go ahead.
Okay. So for the organization qualities, we were all in agreement of items 1, 2, and 3 as being very important. We don't disagree there. One of the things that came up for us was the last part of question 3, saying what evidence/information do they offer to back this up, which kind of folds into question 4. Do they have data to back up their work, their evaluation or self-evaluation process? And so some of the things that we talked about was being redundant and asking about evaluation processes and wondering if we can simplify those questions so that way we can get the answers we're seeking without asking too many questions about that. So our suggestion was to completely eliminate question 4.
Eliminate question 4, okay?
And tell me to slow down if I'm going too fast. But keep 1, 2, and 3 and remove the line in 3 about what evidence or information do they offer to back this up. I brought up that most of the time folks in nonprofits will submit like their most recent impact report or, other supportive data information with their grant applications. And so I don't think that it's necessary to ask an evaluation question at the end of 3. And question number 5, we like that it's talking about how do they course correct and how do they adapt and ensure that they're improving their model. We want to keep that portion of the question, but we think eliminating seeks feedback and shows they can grow from feedback. We suggested to remove that part of the question, as some of these may be new applicants and, in the process of receiving a grant, there is, an after process of seeking feedback or working with organizations to ensure that they're meeting the outcomes that they outlined in the grant application, but we didn't think that it was appropriate to tie those two together. How am I doing, Karina? Kamala, good? Okay. And the order in which we talked about was, so order of most important, so first would be question 1, 2, and 3, keep those in that order, and then switching 5 and 6, put 1, 2, 3, 6, and then 5, because we eliminated question 4.
Okay, hold on, like just 1 minute. So keep 1, 2, and 3 in that order.
And then switch 6 and 5.
And switch 6 and 5, okay.
Yeah. And the whole purpose of eliminating question 4, as a reminder, is that we just think that asking, and I think we wrote a question suggestion. I think Kamala took a note of how we can reframe question 5, but we wanted to keep question 5 as the evaluation piece for the organization qualities instead of having evaluation piece at the end of 3 and 4 and in 5. Kamala, if you don't mind, maybe we can have time to share how we wanted to alter the question.
Yeah, we were thinking about maybe something more around the lines of how are you evaluating your impact against mission? Sort of a more general question about how they're checking in with their mission versus telling us how they're going to evaluate their project or course correct, since it's sort of before they even had a chance to share with us what their project is. And then also being sensitive to the fact that we ask another evaluation question during the program questions.
Okay.
So not wanting to be too data intensive either. Really, we also talked about wanting to emphasize qualitative and storytelling in this section as well. And Karina and Lene, did I capture that?
Yeah, and I was just going to add one of the things that we talked about as it pertained to question 5 is like, we want to hear that the communities are evolving to whether it's community needs or, the shift in their service population. And so really asking them to tell us how they're evolving to community needs or staying in alignment with their mission as they're ensuring their model improves and adapts to community changes. And so instead of putting it on like, do they seek feedback from us, really us inquiring what their level of self-assessment and evaluation is as it pertains to their mission and what they set out to do, and how do they stay along that North Star. I think having them tell that story about what they're doing to evaluate themselves is more impactful, I think, at this stage, than assessing whether or not they seek feedback from the funder at this point in the process.
Okay, I think that's great. Was there anything else that you wanted to change? Otherwise, I think I'm going to move us on to the second group.
I think that covers it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. You did a great job. Group B, so let's see. Yeah, Dian, go ahead.
Yes, Dian Salazar. So the items we ranked in order of importance were number 1. Item number 3 was the most important because we felt that having them be representative of the community they're trying to serve, as well as ensuring that it's serving like a purpose that aligns with the values, and that they have like the sort of data information showcase how it will help is the most important. Item number 6, we ranked it as the second most important, as funnily enough, that was also my exact ranking of it as well. And the reason we put item number 6, which is fiscal responsibility, is second most important, is to ensure that we have the most cost effectiveness, the most cost-effective programs, so that we can ensure that as many people are being served as possible and is having as much impact on the community as possible. And then item number 6, it was the third most important. Wait, hold on. Item number 2. Sorry, I mixed up the lines there. Item number 2 was the third most important. Because we were looking about is this executable? Is there a demand for this in the community? Does the community need this, etc.? And then item number 2 was the fourth most important.
Wait, you just said 2. So what's the? Are you?
I swear. Oh, sorry. We actually did something unique because we actually combined something that I'll show you guys in a second. So the fourth most important was item number 1. There was some discussion of whether a mission statement was necessary at the current time, because some smaller organizations don't actually have mission statements, and so that could have been discriminatory to them. It's more like they should be describing what their goals are and stuff like that, which can be done in stuff that aren't necessarily mission statements. And then we combined items 5 and 6 as the least important. Items 5, 6.
4? Do you mean 4 and 5?
4 and 5. Yeah.
Yeah, we just had someone miss. For items 4 and 5, we wrote the least important, and we felt that they could be combined. So.
Okay.
We thought that they sort of cover the same sort of stuff, like getting feedback and being able to adapt and improve to the changing nature of the market and the community, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we have. Are there any questions?
I have a couple things to add, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So on number 1, we thought it would be good to put purpose statement instead of mission statement. We liked the wording that was in the black that was originally there. We thought it would be good to put a word limit, because it says a brief statement, but brief means different things to different people. Yes. On number 3, we liked the chart. We thought that was good. There was also a question on the top of page 4 about language accessibility, and we thought that could also be made into a form instead of them having to narrate it. Would be a good idea. I think that's pretty much my comments.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next group.
Hello, I am reporting for our group. We had some pretty similar thoughts as other groups, so I won't go too deeply into where we overlap. We talked about numbers 1 and 2 kind of getting combined together under a broader question about mission, history, experience, serving the community, and just allowing for some more like narrative within that question. We spent quite a bit of time talking about number 3 and the method for kind of answering this question and allowing there to be some opportunity for organizations to offer some additional context to the quantitative data. This table can be helpful in some instances, but there are some places where having the opportunity to add some context and some comment about your demographic data or the populations you serve and how you serve them would be I think helpful and illustrative for folks who are reviewing applications, and especially for smaller organizations who maybe don't have the infrastructure and data collection capabilities that other larger organizations might have. Would give them some opportunity to speak to their methodology or their plans in a different way. And then we ranked similarly to other folks around, mission, vision, history, experience being very important, who you're serving, and if that's in alignment with your mission. So number 3. And then we also talked about kind of combining 4 and 5 into maybe a broader question about evaluation and how they collect data and report on data. We also think fiscal responsibility is important. We're not saying it's last. We just didn't talk about it as much because it seemed like a pretty standard part of any application. Did I?
That's great. Anything that anyone else from that group wants to add?
Just want to capture that we combine 1 and 2 in the notes up
Oh,
above.
yes. Sorry. Did I not? I might have neglected.
Yeah,
It's
okay,
on there.
sorry, it is. Okay.
Thanks for making sure that we had that.
Okay, great. Then, if there's nothing else to add on this part, we can move into a break.
I think we had 5 more minutes before the break to
we did.
share any reflections from what you all have just heard and shared out. So if you want to discuss anything that popped out at you from what you heard your colleagues say before we break.
Yes, it seemed like from what we're hearing is that most people are on the same page, so that's good. So what should be focused on now will probably, what we're going to be focused on now probably is going to be like wordsmithing and stuff like that. So.
One idea I had on number 3, where it's clients served by the organization, I feel like most of the things in the table are pretty easily collected, but I know when we would go for funding when I worked at Portland State, some people counted their clients by whoever stuck their face in the door, and some people counted them by people they actually provided service to. And so it can be a big disparity if you're comparing apples to oranges. So maybe some way to figure out how they're counting their clients or whatever.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a great point. Other
A question, actually.
Oh, wait, Kathy and then Lolita, you want to go? Okay, so Kathy first and then Lolita.
For fiscal responsibility, I was just wondering if you also capture resources that an organization can provide that wouldn't be part of the budget. Is there a, not even matching, but there's someone there to answer the phone to schedule the clients to come in, or that would have a positive impact at no cost. Or they're provided a vehicle to go out to, these little items that could help the program you can't actually put it down in a budget.
Okay. I think often personnel, all like the support personnel are included in the budget, or like fuel for transportation. Those things typically would be included in the budget unless the budget is too small to cover those things, and then they might be covered by other program budgets within the organization. So.
Well, and I think the overall fiscal responsibility question too is around like the organization as a whole, right? And that they have those types of like controls and checks and balances, and that you have a reasonable budget, that you're not like operating, $1 million in the red every year. All of those I think are super important. But then there's, in the program area, there's also individual like program level budgets, I think, where we're like slicing and dicing a little bit about like, what is PCL funding?
Yeah,
and if you're leveraging other funds to do this work, what are they? So I think it's kind of a both and.
Yes. I wanted to make sure that Lolita got a chance to speak.
Hello. I had a question about, I had some concerns about like the way that number 2 reads, and I know kind of we talked about that a little bit, like combining number 1 and 2, and just kind of, I think really being more transparent in that question, just like, what do we want to know? Like, how do you, like just asking really direct questions keeps the application process, keeps the wording down. There's a lot of describe, and when people start saying describe, that's another page. Every time you see that word, describe, because you're really being intentional about being with all the details. But really, it's like, what are your approaches to like, how you collaborate with CBOs and culturally specific CBOs? Like, how do you ensure that your collaborations, reflect your mission statement, right? Like, it just really like simplified right there. And then there was another part here where we talked about the accountability for racial equity.
Yes.
Describe the organization's most significant achievement. That is subjective. I don't know. Like, depending on where they are and what they do, it's really hard. Like, how do you, like, basically, like, how do you support your staff in, racial equity advancement? Like, what kind of trainings do you offer? What are, and even the people that you partner with, how, what is the alignment in that? Or something that is just a little bit less like, that's kind of like, I mean, if someone says, like, hey, so we've, I don't know, done all these amazing trainings and we are serving this, that, and then we have a smaller organization who just works right with, either the Slavic community or like a different community or whatever, and then really talk about it. But I don't know. It's really wordy right there.
No, I think those specific examples that you gave are helpful because they get to that point, but they break it down a little bit more, which is, I think, part of why we have the word describe, is you want to have enough verbiage and information that you can really get a sense and, like, be able to make a judgment. And if people don't give you enough, it's hard to know. So having those specific examples is helpful. Yes, Stephen.
Can I, if it's okay, I'm going to share a few things going back to what was said, and I'll work backwards, starting with what Lolita was sharing with number 4. I find that the question gets at the theme that we have in blue, but it is specific to racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is important. But I think I'm kind of wondering, and also hearing what was said earlier on whether we want to ask about impact at this portion. But if we do, or if we want to have some semblance of, like, what is their impact thus far? What is their history? Maybe in that way, like, I think getting clearer about that and layering in how racial equity, diversity, inclusion was a part of that would be helpful. But I guess, again, I'm kind of on the fence there. And then for the number 2 piece, I appreciated what you said again about, like, getting clear at one point, our group talked about combining number 2 and number 5, and specifically the black text, the questions that were on the previous application, because I think they both refer to collaborating with the community and identifying services that are needed by the community. So I wonder if there is some level, I mean, I'm not sure how much we are streamlining, but you could try to streamline 1, 2, and 5, or keep 1 separately and combine 2 and 5. I think we went back and forth a little bit there. And then last thing I'll add, sorry for throwing out so much. Number 3, going back to demographics. Again, our group talked a lot about the table and the difficulties of working within like a rigid quantitative system. So would definitely double click the piece about being able to add context. I think at one point we were wondering, like, is it better to just keep it as a narrative form so that organizations can describe how they are collecting data or how their demographics represent the organizations along, and the question can prompt for specifics so that different types of demographics are covered, including like board members, management staff. But what I really wonder here is how is this question being reviewed and judged? Because say an organization without the infrastructure to collect the data doesn't have these data and puts all of their numbers in not given, does that go against them? Which would make me think that, like, you know, not every organization, again, can collect these data, or it may not always be relevant to them. All of these different areas, they may focus on a specific, you know, language group across all socioeconomic groups, and so they may not be collecting those data. So I'm craving criteria, I guess.
Yes, no, those are all really great thoughts, and we're going to continue. I want to make sure that we have enough time for our second set of small groups. So just quickly before we go to the break, especially because Lene is leaving, I just want to check and see if there's anyone online that wants to say anything, and then I want us to go to the break. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say goodbye to everyone. I have a work meeting that's going on right now on another computer, but it was great to talk with everyone in the first group. I'll share my thoughts from the second portion of the questions via email. I'll send them to you, Meg, so that way you guys have my thoughts. But happy conversation, happy holidays. Stay well, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Lene. Okay, so we will take just a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll get ready to move into the second half.
All right, welcome back from the break. I'm going to go ahead and just give instructions for the next part because I think you don't really need a lot. You all know what you're doing now. It's just that you're going to move on to a different section of that crosswalk document. And the next section is focused on program activities. So it's really, an organization is going to come forward in an application and they want specific activities and services funded or a specific program. So what you all brainstormed last time was 7 topics specific to the program activities, and we crosswalked what we asked in our previous application to what you all brainstormed, and you're going to answer the same questions you answered last time a minute ago. You're going to rank in order of importance those 7 topics, and you're going to talk about what kinds of things we should add, keep, and delete. For transparency, I'm going to tell you my Word program is not keeping up on my computer, so as I note take, it's getting frozen. The good news is this is all being recorded, and that's important because you all bring up a lot of really deep things that I probably couldn't reflect accurately in notes anyway. So we're going to watch that recording and make sure we get it right. Any questions before I assign you to small groups?
Meg, can you remind us on 5 what the highlight is there?
Oh, I
don't remember what that was in the notes.
5. Page 5 or number 5? Oh, yeah. Okay. You all at the last, in your brainstorming, put forth sort of this question about, is a proposed program an expansion of of current work? Is it continuing work? Is it already in progress? Is it new? That's not something we've ever asked in an application before. And so we noted there that was from you all, that we don't typically ask that. And if you want to keep that, we want to kind of understand why. Because it hasn't been a priority for us in the future, and we want to understand like what the thinking was there. Did that answer your question, Alejandra?
Yes. I saw the notes right under there.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions before I get you into group assignments? Okay. So in the hybrid group this time, Karina, you'll be there again. And then Kathy and Alejandra. So Erica will take you with a laptop and get you connected. And then Dean, Kamala, and Alex. And if you all want to use that circular table or the back table, go for it. And then Stephen, Lolita, and Lisa, you are the last group. Did I miss anybody? We're changing groups. We reassigned you.
Okay.
Okay. I would say Dean, Kamala, and Alex, if you want to take this round table or the back table. I'm going to go off mute. You guys work it out. I'm going to turn it over to Erica. I'm just going to let you all know that I am not going to we're not going to share my screen with the notes because my Word program keeps freezing. And since this meeting is recorded, we know we're going to be able to use that recording to really get to what you're saying. I'm going to take notes here. You just won't see it. Erica just asked me I was going to make an announcement earlier in the meeting, which I forgot to do, and she suggested maybe now is the time, and she's right. We are really excited to say that we offered the position of Community Engagement Coordinator to, and she accepted the offer, Katrina Peterson, who is currently working with Race Forward's Policy Innovation Lab, and she did organizing and community engagement specifically around climate justice policy with communities in South Seattle. And I think you all are going to really enjoy her. She will be joining us in mid-December, so she'll be in touch with you to start building individual relationships, and we are thrilled to be able to welcome her. Thanks, Erica. Oh, and I should really recognize Lolita, Stephen, Kamla, Alejandra, and Karina, who spent time on our interview panels and met all of the candidates that we interviewed and who provided invaluable expertise and perspective on behalf of all of you. And I really, really thank you all for that time.
Thank you, everyone. We just wanted to get that exciting announcement out of the way. It is exciting. Okay, so we are going to do this just the way that we did before, and we're going to start with a hybrid group, giving them the opportunity to report out, and then again, as you heard, Meg is just going to be typing notes on her computer, so if you have a question or you need us to go back, just let us know because we're having issues with the screen share and the computer interface. So hybrid group, please go first.
Yeah. All right, so should I just jump into the things that we did, I guess. Yeah, okay. So we like keep number one, understanding who will be served. But we did have some questions about the table and some potential questions about the sensitivity about maybe the types of questions that are being asked. Yeah, we kind of spent quite some time on the table, but yeah, so we just had some general questions about those. We opted to actually just eliminate question 2 because we felt as though the question is kind of embedded into question 3, which is like the program plan as well as the staff, what the program is going to look like, what the outreach is going to look like, and things like that. So we felt as though it kind of could be encapsulated a little bit with question 3. And we also talked about swapping starting with question 3, like that being the first question, and then the second question being the understanding who will be served, right? So it'd be like, what is your overall plan, right? How did you come to understand the needs of this community and the services that are needed in this community? What's your plan for outreach? What's your plan for caseload and staffing? That's the initial question. And then going into the understanding who will be served based on the plan. As for the table, we were a little confused about the table that was associated with question 3. We were a little concerned about the third column, the amount of services. I'm assuming what was probably meant is number of services to be offered in the year. So I guess just like the clarification on the wording for that particular column. And then we thought to add a 4th column for impact or intended outcomes of program activity. And the reason why the potential add for an additional column was because there was in question 4 had the, describe the purpose and specifically at least 3 intended outcomes. So if on that table we're having, program activities, number of people to be served, number of services offered, and then what is your intended outcome after that 1 year serve, right? But obviously that would mean moving the table down to maybe like after question 4, because they wouldn't quite understand why they would have to have that intended for question 3 or part of that question. As for question 5, why these services, what informed choices for these services, we put to eliminate that question, or maybe make some clarification on a brand new service versus an expansion and continuation, because the first few questions are like, what is your plan? What is your program? Who do you plan on serving? What are your outcomes looking like? What is 1 year into this program? So it kind of made it sound like this was going to be a brand new organization applying for this. But then question 5 was like, is this an expansion of what you're already doing? Is this a continuation of work? So either eliminating it or just making it very clear that like, this is something that we are doing. These are the outcomes we have had. These are the outcomes we want to continue having versus a projected. And then 6, eliminate. We thought to get rid of it just because, again, it was some of the information is already embedded in other questions. And then 7, sense of fiscal responsibility. We feel that's a very important question to have. So we felt it necessary to maybe keep it. And yeah, just keep it. It's beautiful. It's perfect. Well, it's beautiful. Okay. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all, Karina. Thanks. And I just want to point out, we actually eliminated things on this one. So, hey.
That's great. Okay, so if there's nothing else from that group, let's get the next group, Group B. Who is speaking for that group?
We don't know what group we have.
How about Lisa? How about if your group is Group B?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to do my best to share on behalf of my group, but invite them in to share as well. Okay. So I'll just kind of go in order of ranking and talk through each question then. We wanted to combine numbers 2 and 5. We found that they asked about similar kind of information, how the program is connecting to community needs, and felt like it was most important because it really touched on the why and how you know this is important. And we do see some distinction where number 2 might connect to like discrepancies in current state, and so the data might be helpful. And number 5 ensures that there's participant voice and leadership. But we do think that they can be combined. Then next, we suggested combining number 3 and 6. I know number 6 doesn't actually have any language from the past application, but we think that it could be good to layer in that piece around culturally specific, responsive, or relevant program design into number 3. And getting into number 3 a little bit, I'll share some different things. Lolita suggested, and I may not have captured this correctly, so please again come in if I'm saying it incorrectly, but the wording of what outreach methods will you use to recruit children or caregivers for the program, I think what I was hearing is, a potentially paternalistic mindset there of like, how are participants going to come into your program that you've designed versus what types of community engagement will you design to provide access for the program? So I was thinking about like, how are you going to them versus them coming to you? I'm not sure if that captures what you were saying. And the other thing that came up as well is, how is your program matching the PCL's priorities? And we talked with Meg about how the application requires you to select one of the program areas. And I think based on the priority areas that are set, there will be more specific. So we're curious if they have to, or they should be justifying or just explaining the connection there. Okay, so going down the ranking, number 1 is after that, the who will be served. And we again had some questions connecting back to what we were discussing before. And I think ultimately we we're wanting this question to be a bit more flexible and to give autonomy around how folks report out the demographics. It just feels very rigid and connected to dominant culture, forcing folks to report based on numbers, which may not always be representative around how folks think about demographics. And that's not to say that you can leave it completely open-ended, right? We think that there could be a balance in terms of giving them the table as an option or giving them the option to report in a different format with like bullets, but giving them clarity on like the level of specificity that is needed. An example that came up is like, what if an organization, I might have said this already, is serving LGBTQ youth? That's not captured there, but might be important to the program. Okay.
Moving this language,
Oh yeah.
just having it be the
Yep.
universal statement under where you're trying to get them.
So number 4, creating equitable outcomes came next. And this one is kind of like a loaded one for sure. One thing that we were talking about was the inclusion of racial equity, diversion, and inclusion across the questions, which I know that's based on prior feedback, and I like that. And in the attending program activities, that last question of how will the program monitor racial equity, diversity, inclusion in program attendance just feels like a big question and would lead to like another page of responses. We liked, if you go down to number 5, the prompt, please include any racial equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations in your explanations, which prompts them to layer it in, but doesn't require them to give a whole separate response. So I think that's something worth considering. The other thing is we wonder if PCL has defined racial equity, diversity, and inclusion because, folks define those terms and that concept differently. And so I think it's important to have that. Something else we said, sorry if I'm taking a long time, methods, or just in general, we found a lot of the prompts to be long and wordy, which I would assume is based on the need for like specificity, but we wonder if that presents barriers to organizations and folks filling out the application. So we wonder if like for methods, you just ask how you collect the data rather than adding in all of the words there. And one thing that I was thinking for results and reflections, there was a piece in the organizational portion about like responding to feedback, adapting. And I wonder if you can layer in like into the results and reflections, how an organization adapts based on results and uses those reflections. And then the last 2 ranking, or number 7 came last. Still important, of course, but that one is just straightforward. And one thing that I will just kind of say again, I said this in the last meeting, and it's something that I think I'm just personally, I care about. The administrative expenses is something that can be contentious for organizations, and it really depends. Every organization has a different overhead rate. I just wonder if 15% is representative of what organizations are needing and using, or if sometimes that's requiring them to skim out their operations when in reality they may need more. So that's like a question for me. Did I capture it, Lisa, yes. Lolita? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Stephen.
I just had a couple comments. I think it might be, and Stephen kind of mentioned this, it might be good to have some like a glossary or something like that. Because, for example, there's a question on page 6, it says, accessibility, how will you make services accessible at a minimum, address hours of operation, transportation to and from the program? To me, it's like, that's a teeny tiny, not that important part of what accessibility means. And I think that that is an important emerging field in child welfare, or you know what I mean, right? And so I feel like that should be more defined of, there's a lot of different ways you can make something more accessible other than providing transportation, which would probably be really difficult for a lot of folks to do. The same with like racial equity to diversity and inclusion. Are we also looking at other kinds of diversity, neurodiversity, language diversity, you know, that kind of thing? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I think those are really good points. I think we have one last group to go.
We did a deep dive on maybe 3, 5, and 7, so I'll speak to those, and then I'll hand it to Alex to share the ranking conversation. In terms of 3, we also had questions around the use of the table, thought it was prescriptive. We wondered if this trained reviewers to look at this information as apples to apples and be comparing it, so they're capturing numbers but maybe not outcomes, or they're looking at outputs maybe versus the outcomes, and so the way you might reach a population is going to maybe not be captured as well in this format. And also, what would the word service, how would you define that further? With number 5, we talked a bit about how there is some interest in capturing whether or not this is a capacity building or a renewal, and helping the levy, maybe all of us understand how many are new applicants, what are they looking for, what's the type of support, and if the levy wanted to keep this question, we could say it's not going to be rated, it's not a criteria question, it's more for our own information. And then with fiscal responsibility, I think we share concern about the 15% cap, and not would love clarity if that's like a city policy, or why 15%. Alex asked a great question. If a nonprofit has a federally negotiated rate, would that be acceptable to the city? So just loving a little bit more clarity around that. The budget form, I would imagine, is quite intense for nonprofits. And so why do we need so much information about how many hours, what percent, if is it full-time, if it's part-time? We wondered if there might be room to, one, give more open-ended questions, such as, do you pay a living wage? And how do you know you pay a living wage? Or if that budget form, which is quite different than what most nonprofits are creating for their own purposes, would they have an opportunity to give the information in a different format? So those were some of the deeper conversations we had, and give it to Alex to share the ranking.
Thank you. So we talked about sort of number 1 and 3 kind of being combined, just into this overall question of like who you're serving and how you're doing it, being the most important. And then our second, we talked about questions 2 and 5, kind of being in the same general vicinity and being the next most important. Like why? How are you serving? Who are you serving? Why are you serving them that way? And how did you come to that conclusion that these were the appropriate services for the issue you're trying to address? And then next, the questions about intended outputs and outcomes, and equity across those outputs and outcomes. We also think that number 6 is probably a part of that question as well, especially if you're providing culturally specific services. How are you attending to questions of equity and accessibility in there? And then we also, again, fiscal responsibility was last, but not like a real last, not like not important, just, I think just a given maybe is more.
Thank you for that. Okay, so.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Are organizations who are applying, are they able to contact and get advice about what the questions mean and that kind of thing, and support in completing the grants?
Yeah, we do an informational, last time we did a couple different informational sessions, and then we also did a weekly Q&A that was written. So anybody who emailed us with a question, internally among our work team, we workshopped the answer together, and then every Friday we publish on our website what the answer to those questions were and shared it with all applicants. So we asked applicants to kind of sign up for a email blast, and so they all had access to those ongoing questions that came up. They could reach out to us with questions, but again, we would put them in writing and make them available to everyone because it didn't seem like we wanted to advantage one applicant over another by answering some questions for some and not giving others that same information.
Okay, so is there any further reflections on this piece of it? Yes, Alex.
I wanted to make sure that we capture, we talked a lot, I think when we were talking about number 3 and the table, we talked a lot about like this idea of like breadth versus depth of services and how to capture that within the questions that we have about program activity. Again, so we're not like setting reviewers up to be having like a false sense of apples to apples, like, oh, look, this program is serving, 50 kids and this program is only serving, 20 for the same price. Like, obviously the 50 kids is a better deal. So I want to just make sure that like talking about depth versus breadth or like intensity of service, we have some way to capture it, and maybe that is in amount, but not really, right? Because I can do 50 big group sessions of recreation with youth, and have a big amount of service, or I can have a smaller amount of intensive services with single youth. So just like some thinking about that and ways for reviewers to kind of be trained to be thinking about depth versus breadth.
Thank you. I think that's some great points. I want to give like a chance for maybe 1 or 2 more quick comments, and then I want to make sure that we have enough time for Meg to present the parts about the reviewer. So I think I see Alejandra's hand. I want to check in online, see if there's nothing. Okay. So okay. Anybody else?
I don't actually have a comment, but I'm assuming this is coming. I would just like to understand the whole process a little bit more, which I assume is coming. Like, what is the review process? How do reviewers rank things? But I just don't want to jump ahead if that's coming.
No, that's a perfect segue.
Okay.
What a great segue. It's like we paid you to do that. Yuxing or Joel, whenever you're ready to share screens, we're going to turn it over and get into the nitty-gritty of the review process. So this next part of the agenda, we're going to look at what we did for our review process last time. I'm going to walk you through some pretty high-level description of that. And then if we have time at the end, we're going to ask you some reflection questions. I'm a little bit worried that we're going to run out of time for that. And so the key question I want you to think about as I go through this information is, what else do you want to know that we're not giving you? Okay? All right. So whenever you're ready to share. Oh, okay, thanks. We have always used we've always recruited volunteers from the community to read and score grant applications, and they use criteria, like we've said, that are published at the time of application. So applicants see the criteria against which their application would be scored. They see the actual score form that the reviewers would use. So in 2019-20, we published a job description for reviewers, and we had an application that was open for 3 months where they could apply, and we recruited through social media, newsletters, our networks, word of mouth, and we offered a stipend that averaged around $250 per reviewer to read and score up to 10 applications, keeping in mind that those applications were about 20 pages long. We received 114 grant applications last time, so we selected 65 people to be reviewers. That was out of about 100 people who expressed interest. We screened them based on their lived or professional experience in equity, diversity, and inclusion, or in our 6 required program areas. We held a 2.5-hour training with the reviewers to cover bias in scoring, give them an overview of the application, and to practice scoring parts of an application using the scoring criteria. On average, 5 reviewers read and scored every application, and we as Levy staff averaged their scores to create a final score on each application. Reviewers did not meet with each other and discuss the applications because scheduling 12 groups of 5 volunteers is really challenging. So instead, we as staff met individually with each reviewer 2 times, once midway through the process to check on their progress and answer any questions they had, and once at the end to collect their scores and answer any questions they had at that time. For transparency, we as staff provided every applicant with copies of the completed review scores for their application so they could see the scores and the notes from each reviewer. Those score sheets do not include reviewers' names, just the results of the scoring on each of the criteria in different parts of the application. We also gave the score sheets to our allocation committee for their decision-making, along with a set of funding recommendations that we as staff developed on the applications. We surveyed our reviewers at the end of their experience to understand how they felt about it. So out of those 65 folks, 54 of them responded to our survey, 83%. That's a really good response rate if you're familiar with survey response rates. We were super excited about that. Demographically, about half of our reviewers identified as a person of color, and about half of them were between the ages of 25 and 44. 100% of them said that being a grant reviewer was a positive experience. We also surveyed applicants about their experience in our funding process, and we asked them specific questions around the review process element along with other parts of the process. We sent that survey to 131 people who were associated with the applications, and 44 people responded. We do not know of those 44 who is associated with a funded or unfunded application. So we have these results, but we didn't want to ask that question because we didn't want to have anyone feel like they couldn't share honestly what they thought about the process. There were, of the 12 questions they were asked on that survey, 2 of them spoke specifically to the review process. The first question was around the applicant's, how well the applicant felt satisfied with the Levy's recruitment of reviewers. 48% were satisfied with how we recruited reviewers, 14% were dissatisfied, and 45% were neutral. They didn't express satisfaction or dissatisfaction, so we're not really sure what to make of that. With regard to the scoring criteria, we asked applicants about their satisfaction with the scoring criteria used by volunteer reviewers. And 68% of applicants, I shouldn't say 68%, 68% of the 44 people who responded to this survey were satisfied, 14% were dissatisfied, and 18% were neutral. So we as a staff have reflected on this, and there were a few challenges that we encountered in the course of this the course of our review process last time. Some reviewers backed out at the last minute. So there were 22 applications that ended up being scored by only 4 people. That means that the scores for those applications were only averaged across 4. And 1 application was scored by only 3 reviewers. When we looked as a staff at analysis around the variation in scoring for reviewers who scored the same application, we saw some pretty significant variation. For example, on an application for a specific after-school program, one reviewer gave it 75 points out of 100 possible, and another gave it a 97. A 20-plus point variation wasn't necessarily uncommon. Anecdotally, applicants who saw that variation on their score sheets emailed and called us to express their concerns if it happened to be their experience. We, as a staff, have reflected on all of what I just shared with you, so you can hear sort of workload of managing 65 volunteers, recruiting them, training them, supporting them, what happens when folks back out, and then score variation, and wondered whether or not we should consider hiring 12 to 15 short-term contractors who represent the diversity of the type of children and families that we serve to review and score applications this time around. I just raced through a lot of information. So this is a brainstorming session only, and there's no wrong answer. So given what you've heard, here's the things we're wondering. What are some pros and cons that you see to having volunteers read and score grant applications? What are some pros and cons you would see to having a cohort of contractors do it? And then what questions do you have about this process or requests for additional information that we can bring you next time to dive deeper? And we've got about 10 minutes for that. I'll take notes, and then we'll wrap up.
I would say one pro of having volunteers do it is it grows awareness of the program, and you have more, what's the word? Not accountability, but just more investment generally with community and philanthropy. So I just wanted to put that out there because I'm sure there's a lot of cons.
Thank you, Kamala. Deanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I see. So as you said, several volunteers didn't show up, if I recall correctly, and so in my opinion, a mixed approach seems to make the most sense. In my opinion, that way you get a few contractors who are fiscally invested in showing up, as well as volunteers can also help to grow the awareness and are invested on their own as well. While also not relying entirely on unpaid labor. That's my stance. Unpaid labor, just in the sense of like they aren't being paid for it, so like they have their level of motivation can depend day by day on whether they are exhausted from paid work the day before. So,
Thank you, Dean.
I have a clarifying question. So contractors versus volunteers, the volunteers are also paid a stipend, right?
The volunteers get a $250 stipend.
And contractors would be for a period of time, they get a salary. So they're like just
like
ad hoc contractors.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they're not going to be like full-time city employees. They're casual employees. Temporary.
But theoretically,
temporary.
A higher rate.
Yeah.
Right. So you consolidate the payments into.
Lisa's gonna.
I mean, we haven't looked into all the details of this yet, so I can't say we haven't worked out what it would look like, but, I'm sorry. Okay. I would say that the idea would be a smaller number of people, and you would probably still have a per application rate, so there would be assigned a certain number of applications to score.
Well, based off that information, I am leaning towards contractors because I feel because of the feedback that you got from the applicants about variability in the rating. So I think if you had contractors, assuming they were representative of the, met the criteria for representation for scoring, I feel like you'd have more control in terms of like training for them. Yeah, so maybe that would reduce some of the interreliability of scoring.
Looks like we have a question from Katrina online, so I'm going to go to her first. Oh, Karina, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're okay.
Go ahead.
My thing with volunteers is I just wonder if we would be worried about a bias in the volunteers. I'm sure they would go through some sort of like bias. Oh my gosh. Okay, I can do it. Bias awareness training or something to that effect. But just giving the amount of like the possibility of the level of subjectivity that would go into viewing these types of things, right? Mm-hmm. That's just like where my mind goes. Is whereas with contractors, their purpose and like their job scope is to remain objective, right? They're not. Yeah.
Thank you, Karina. Yes, just both groups would have to go through anti-bias training, but your point's noted, Alex.
Yeah.
And then Dean.
I just think that the ability to more deeply train the contractors is like a huge pro, and also to account for, I think we also, as run a large government procurement process, and within ours, we have this similar issue where some people are just like really hard graders, and some people are a little bit more like, I can kind of read between the lines here and get that you met that criteria, just maybe not exactly the way I would have done it. And I think you would have more time to spend with a smaller group of contractors to kind of talk through some of those pieces to give you a better overall.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Dean and then to Stephen.
Yeah, overall, I am content with the general, progress of the discussion, but I do want to point out and also question the assumption that contractors are inherently less biased, just because I think that's really subjective. That someone mentioned that they thought that it was less biased, and I sort of question that because we all have our own biases, regardless of whether we're paid to do it or volunteers. That's all. Just wanted to raise my concern with that.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, I kind of agree with this trend towards contractors, but I am very intrigued by the mixed approach. I think one thing I would wonder with volunteers is and this may not be true, but folks who have time and the ability to volunteer tend to be from a different socioeconomic class, which is a tendency. It's not always true. So I think contractors, if you're paying them a better wage, it might be, you might be able to collect a more representative group. That's based on my assumption, so it may be wrong. The other thing that I was going to say is, if you do have volunteers, it'd be interesting to give them a stipend per application, which then incentivizes getting through at least a few, if not like all. And the last thing is, I've heard in different like evaluation protocols, whenever you have reviewers who have too much variability, you can bring them into the same room and go through a process of reconciling, which would be difficult with volunteers, but could be easier to do with contractors. And you can maybe get underneath why there was so much variation and even get some insights on who is a harder grader. So that gives you more information on their other ratings.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's anyone that hasn't spoken that's trying to jump in that I've maybe been missing, because it's been a lively discussion. Nope? Okay.
If we have time, the 14% of the applicants who expressed dissatisfaction with the process, other than variability in rating, is there any other findings that are important for us to take into consideration?
Great question, and I'll add that to the list of things to bring you next time, because off the top of my head, I don't remember what that 14% of dissatisfied folks is. Just keep in mind, 14% of 44 is not very many people. So if they wrote what dissatisfied them about that, we'll have it. If they wrote a qualitative comment that was about dissatisfaction with one of the other elements of the process, I may or may not have details to bring you, but got it.
Okay, silence. Any other thoughts about the reviewers kind of leaning either way? I haven't heard anyone saying, oh, we definitely should do this or that, although I'm hearing a little leaning towards contractors, but still concerns. Lisa.
I think my concern with contractors, and of course we don't know who these people would be, is people who are in the system, who are part of the, let's say, social services network in Portland, might have biases because they know certain programs or they know certain people or whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I think maybe the benefit to having contractors is hopefully they'll show up better. But I also think, to Stephen's point, I could see that, yes, there might be some privileged people who would be available to come and volunteer, but for a $250 stipend, I think there are also people who are unemployed or underprivileged, let's say, mm-hmm. who might come and volunteer. So I don't know that I don't know whether it tends to favor one population over another. Like, I know I have a lot of clients who for $250 would be, well, they go and sell their blood or plasma for $50. So, this has got to be easier than that, in my opinion.
Yes, Kamla.
I think I'm circling back to the idea of a mixed group, and one of the reasons for that is it feels more inclusive, and I think too for folks who are not, when I hear the word consultant, I think expert, and so I think I'm a little bit allergic to consigning this review process to experts, and I also think it can be a professional development opportunity for folks. A way to learn about the program and how to be more involved in community. So I just do think there's a lot of add values or value adds, but I don't necessarily think it makes sense to continue with 65 volunteers. So if there is a way to do a little bit of both, or have one group of 5 that's just volunteer based, just to kind of carry through and experiment with that 1 more year or 3 more years.
Thank you. And I just saw in the chat that Karina said that she also agrees that the mixed process would be best. So thank you for chiming in with that. I can hear there's like a lot of discussion bubbling up around this, and I really appreciate that. there's also only a few minutes left of our meeting, and so I'm going to go ahead and transition us to reflection, and just wanted to open it up to see if anyone has things that worked well or that they thought could be improved today. And in addition, if you don't want to say something in the group, there are these like sticky notes here, and as you're walking out, you can just put a little plus or a triangle to let us know which one, and leave those for us on the table with your name tent, and we will gather them and we'll get that feedback. But also wanted to hear if anyone has things that they want to share with the group today about what worked well or could be improved.
I really liked how you mixed up the groups when we met, and different perspective and ideas. Yeah.
Kathy.
I love small group work, but I think in both of our groups we felt pretty pressed for time to be able to like dig in the way that we wanted to. So it would be nice to have just a little bit more time, or maybe less packed agenda to give us some time to get in there.
Thank you. Lisa?
This is very minute, but it'd be nice if the name cards had names on both sides, because like I can't see Dion or Andrea's. Alejandra, see?
Got it. That's helpful. Lolita.
Yes, I thought overall it was very exciting for me, but I agree with Alex in that if there's any way possible to just, I know it's hard with time, but just unpacking one thing at a time, just to be focused, to give an opportunity to really take a deeper dive and really think about it, because it is so important. That's one thing, and then the heat. It's freezing in here. That was just a little extra.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Thank you. We do appreciate that. Okay. I saw Stephen, and then I saw Kamla.
I'll be really quick. I definitely agree small groups are helpful and it feels really pressed. And I feel like in the large group, there were conversations that we could have gone deeper into, which I don't have a solve for, except I do think that maybe giving us time to jot down last thoughts that weren't captured in the full conversation would be helpful, because I think there was just so much content, and I'd imagine it's hard for you all to try to synthesize everything just based on what was shared.
Just to clarify, so you mean while you're still in the small groups, jot down last thoughts before you come to the large group?
I think more so when we're wrapping up large group conversations.
Okay.
But it could be both.
Okay, thanks. I just want to clarify that.
Just a quick thought. I don't mind it. Like I love that you give us so much information to process ahead of time, so we're coming prepared. But for example, if I knew if I'd been prompted or somehow it didn't enter into my consciousness that I needed to rank these, but that's something I could have spent 5-10 minutes just getting started with at home. So when I came, I was a little bit more ready to go with that. So that's just a small thing, but mainly it's just gratitude for all of the work that you put into these meetings and supporting us. It's a ton of work, and I know you're getting a lot of input all the time, so I just want to appreciate your work.
Thank you. We really appreciate that too, and we're looking forward to the next meeting, and we will do our best, keeping in mind we are now moving into community engagement is starting. We're starting to be shaping criteria and applications. It's rolling now. And so there's a lot to do in order to get to having these applications and having our community be able to apply for the funds and being able to get the funds out. So we're, as staff, trying to balance your needs with also the needs to kind of keep things going. So we're going to keep synthesizing everything you told us and do our best. And we'll have Katrina on board, so that will be really helpful as well. So thank you.
We don't have dates for next year yet. You all have individually weighed in. Well, many of you have weighed in with me individually on schedule preferences. We wanted to wait till we had our new person on board because we weren't sure exactly, in case somebody came in and had a specific plan for a trip or a thing they needed to do. So once she gets on board in December, we're going to, one of the first work tasks will be to iron out the meeting calendar for 2024. I also just want to remind us all that when we created the sort of job description for the work that you're doing, it's 12 to 15 hours a year. So as you go into this next month, maybe reflect, are you willing to spend more time? Because we could make meetings longer, but we want to balance that against what we've asked of you. And so you don't need to answer that right now. I think it's important for everybody to spend time thinking about it. But we have continually heard you all give us feedback about, oh, this is meaty, we could use more time. And we also want to honor that you're giving us so much time and we don't want to ask too much. So we're going to keep doing our best, but I think it's a conversation with you. And thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so much. Yes.